The billionaire walked through his front door earlier than usual and couldn't believe his eyes. David Montgomery was the kind of man who was always home late, usually past 9 o'clock, when the house was already quiet and his little boy tucked into bed. But that evening had taken an unexpected turn. His investors' meeting in Manhattan had ended sooner than planned, so instead of lingering in the city, he drove straight back to his Greenwich estate without letting anyone know. When he pushed the heavy door open, David froze. The grand living room, with its polished wood floors and spotless decor, was lit by the glow of the chandelier. And right there on the floor, knelt Maya Johnson, the family's 28-year-old housemaid. Her dark hands were pressed against a rag, scrubbing at a stain of orange juice still fresh on the boards. Beside her, 4-year-old Ethan Montgomery, his blonde hair a tousled halo, leaned awkwardly on his small purple crutches, clutching a cleaning cloth of his own. "Auntie Maya, I'll do this part. We're a team," Ethan said proudly, wobbling as he bent toward the mess. "Careful, champ," Maya said gently, her voice warm enough to soften the coldest night. "Just a little more, then you take a break." At that moment Ethan turned and spotted his father in the doorway. His blue eyes lit up. "Daddy? You're home early." Spinning too quickly, his body tilted dangerously, but Maya reached out and caught his elbow just in time, steadying him. Rising quickly to her feet, she stammered, "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery. I didn't know you'd be back yet. Sorry about the mess." David's gaze lingered on his son first, the wide smile he hadn't seen in months, and then shifted to Maya's hands red from cleaning. "What are you up to, buddy?" David asked softly. "I helped Auntie Maya," Ethan declared, puffing out his little chest. "And today I stood all by myself for almost 5 whole minutes." David's eyes flicked to Maya. She lowered her tone. "We do small exercise sessions during my lunch breaks or after the chores. Just stretches and balance drills, nothing risky." Ethan cut in quickly, almost like a lawyer making his case. "She says if I practice I'll be able to run like other kids. She says I'm strong like a warrior." Something tightened in David's chest, a feeling he hadn't let himself recognize in years. He swallowed hard, then crouched down to meet his son's eyes. "Go on upstairs and change into your pajamas. I'll come tuck you in." Ethan nodded, hobbling toward the stairs. But he paused at the first step and tossed words that hit his father harder than any boardroom negotiation. "You're not gonna fire Auntie Maya, right? Mom gets mad when the ladies do things she didn't tell them to." David dropped to one knee, looking directly into his boy's earnest face. "Do you like Miss Maya?" "I love Auntie Maya. She plays with me. She listens. She never rushes me. She believes I can walk like the other kids." David exhaled slowly, then asked the question that weighed on him like an anchor. "Am I your friend too, Ethan?" The boy looked down at his crutches. "You're my dad. Friends are the ones who are there." The words cut deep. David reached out, squeezing Ethan's shoulder. "Tomorrow morning I'll be here. I want to see you do your exercises." Maya blinked in surprise. "Sir, you're usually gone by then." "Tomorrow," David interrupted firmly, "I'll be here." That night, before his wife Caroline returned, David sat on the edge of his son's bed. Ethan's purple crutches rested neatly against the nightstand like twin guards. David pulled out his phone, canceled 3 morning meetings, and shifted an important 8 o'clock call. For the first time in his career, family outweighed business. When Caroline walked in later, slipping her heels off by the door, she found him sitting quietly. "You came home early," she said with a hint of surprise. "I just saw Maya working with Ethan," David said plainly. Caroline looked away, guilty. "I knew about it. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd panic about liability. But I've seen him happier, actually making progress. When you're home, you only ask about his medicine, his worksheets, his doctors. You never ask if he laughed that day." David's throat burned with guilt. "I canceled tomorrow morning. I'll be here to watch him practice." Caroline studied him for a long moment. In 15 years of marriage, she had never once seen her husband cancel meetings for family. "Maybe this time really is different," she whispered. From upstairs, Ethan's little voice floated down. "Daddy, you'll be here in the morning, right?" "I will," David called back, watching the crutches tap softly against the stairs. That night, as he sat in the darkened living room, David realized something had shifted. A door had quietly closed behind him, the door of constant absence. And another had opened wide, the door of presence. By 6:30 the next morning, the kitchen smelled of butter and flour. Maya was already at the counter whisking a bowl of batter, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied neatly away from her face. The sun streamed gently through the tall windows, painting the marble counter with gold. David walked in quietly wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. It was rare for him to be this casual in his own home, and even stranger to see him up this early without a phone glued to his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," Maya said, startled. "You're up early. Trying something new?" David leaned against the counter, taking in the scene. "What does Ethan usually like for breakfast?" "Pancakes. Mondays are his favorite," Maya replied, flipping one carefully onto a plate. "He says he needs the energy to get through the week." Each pour and flip of the batter seemed deliberate, as though she was measuring trust in spoonfuls. David took a sip of hot cocoa, then asked quietly, "Why is Ethan so important to you, Maya?" She set the whisk down and straightened. "My little brother Caleb was born with mobility issues. Years of therapy, exercises, balance drills. I learned what helped him, what didn't, and how to make it feel like a game so he wouldn't feel different. I'm not licensed," she admitted softly, "but I know what worked for him. And when I saw Ethan here, alone in this big house with everything except joy, I couldn't just stand by." David studied her closely. For the first time he saw not just an employee, but a woman who carried quiet knowledge carved by love and struggle. At 7:45, the sound of small crutches tapped down the stairs. Ethan appeared in rocket print pajamas, hair sticking out in every direction, a sleepy smile on his face. "Dad, you didn't go to work?" "Not today, champ. Today I'm your cheerleader." Ethan grinned, letting out a soft cheer, then sat down at the table where Maya slid a stack of pancakes in front of him. "Fuel for warriors," she teased, making him giggle until his cheeks turned pink. By 8 o'clock, the backyard had been transformed. A thick practice mat was laid on the grass. Maya guided Ethan through slow breathing, arm stretches, and tiny joint rotations. "Eyes on one spot. Slow breaths," she instructed. Ethan let go of his crutches, wobbling slightly. David held his own breath. 15 seconds passed. Then 25. "You've got this," he whispered, voice cracking. 30 seconds. Ethan's little body trembled, but Maya steadied him with only 2 fingertips, just enough to keep him upright without stealing the victory. "I did it," he shouted. 30 seconds. David scooped him into his arms, voice thick. "I'm so proud of you, champ." The rest of the morning was filled with sit-to-stands, walking drills with crutches, ankle stretches. Small steps, repeated with patience, added up to something monumental. When Ethan logged into his preschool class later, David motioned for Maya to follow him into his study. He pulled up a document on the screen. "I want to make this official," he said firmly. "You'll be Ethan's therapy aide. I'll cover your tuition, books, travel, everything for you to get certified as a physical therapy assistant. And we'll hire another housekeeper so you can focus on Ethan." Maya froze, her hand tightening on the back of the chair. "Sir, I don't even have a diploma." "Then we'll get you one," David replied without hesitation. "You've got the gift. You deserve the credential." Her eyes welled with tears as she covered her mouth with one hand. "Yes, I'll study. I'll do everything I can for Ethan." That afternoon, Caroline's longtime friend Sophie stopped by unannounced. Arms crossed, she stood in the doorway watching Maya help Ethan practice stepping onto a wooden block. "Some jobs have boundaries," Sophie said sharply. "Remember your place. Neighbors talk when people like you start doing experiments with children outside." Ethan froze, clutching his crutches tightly, face turning red. "Auntie Maya's family." "Don't be mean to my family," he shouted, his small voice cutting through the air. Caroline rushed over, pulling Sophie aside with an icy glare. "You don't talk to her like that." David stepped forward too, his tone firm and unyielding. "If someone can't respect the person caring for our child, they don't belong in this house." Sophie stammered, trying to pass it off as concern for Ethan's safety. But the words she had already spoken, "people like you," hung in the air like smoke. The truth was clear. She was asked to leave. When the door shut, Ethan was still by Maya's side, gripping her arm tightly for reassurance. David knelt down to his son's level. She was wrong. In this house we set the rules. That night, David sat at the dining table drafting a new family code. Respect was now a non-negotiable condition for entering their home. Zero tolerance for racist comments. And during therapy sessions, Maya had full authority. Her word carried weight. Caroline read the draft silently, then signed it. Together, they pinned the sheet beside the pancake calendar. The next morning, as the skillet sizzled again, Ethan already knew. Dad was home. The new rhythm had begun. The days that followed brought a rhythm the Montgomery household had never known before. Tuesday morning, David watched with quiet awe as Ethan stood for a full minute without his crutches. By the end of the week, he managed 5 steps in a row, shaky but determined. And one bright morning, as sunlight spilled across the backyard mat, Ethan let go of his crutches, stretched his arms for balance, and took 8 steps straight into his father's arms. "Dad." "I walked," he shouted, breathless, joy bursting from him like a firecracker. David hugged him tightly, eyes wet. Caroline stood at the glass doorway, one hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel so far away. That evening at dinner, Caroline pushed her plate aside and spoke softly. "There was a time I thought about leaving. I felt like a single parent in my own marriage. I was exhausted." David didn't argue. He simply pulled out his phone and showed her his new calendar. Morning meetings permanently blocked. Early calls declined. A fresh reading list filled with books on pediatric therapy and inclusive care. "I know words don't fix things," he said quietly. "Only actions will." Caroline looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching for the truth. Then she nodded as though sealing a fragile but real truce. But the outside world wasn't finished testing them. 2 days later, Maya was in the front yard with Ethan, practicing curb steps along the sidewalk. His crutches clicked against the pavement as she guided him slowly up and down. A security car rolled to a stop nearby. The guard inside rolled down the window, his voice clipped and flat. "Ma'am, this is a residents-only area. I'll need the homeowner to confirm you're allowed here." Maya straightened. "I work here. This is Ethan Montgomery and we're practicing steps." The guard's eyes flicked past Ethan, landing on Maya's face. "Still need the homeowner. Policy." Before Maya could reply, the front door opened and David stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. His expression hardened as he walked toward the car. "She doesn't need me to vouch for her to be treated with basic respect. Her name is Maya Johnson. She's on our household staff list. Next time, ask how to help instead of who someone is." The guard shifted uncomfortably, muttered something and drove off. But the damage was done. The silence left behind was heavy. Ethan gripped his crutches tighter, leaning into Maya's arm for reassurance. That night, David was on the phone with the Homeowners Association. His voice was low but firm. "Your security team needs immediate training on bias awareness. And your staff verification procedures must change. No one in my household should ever be stopped simply because of how they look." The HOA manager stammered apologies, promising reforms. David cut in before he could finish. "I'll be checking." But that wasn't the last blow. Later that week, David's phone buzzed with a call from Eric Sanchez, a rival hedge fund CEO. "I hear you have an exceptional caregiver," Eric said smoothly. "My grandson has cerebral palsy. I'll double her salary, full benefits, and a car. Send me her number." David kept his tone calm, though his jaw clenched. "Maya isn't for sale. She's family." "Everybody's for sale," Eric laughed coldly before hanging up. The words lingered, stinging like a shadow that wouldn't lift. 3 days later, Maya knocked on David's office door. In her hands was a folded letter. Her voice trembled, though her back stayed straight. "Sir, I received a job offer. Double my salary. Full insurance. A car. This would change everything for my family. My mom could finally stop working night shifts. My brother Caleb could go to school full-time." But her eyes dropped. I don't know how I could ever leave Ethan. David leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. Then he asked steadily, "Are you happy here? Do you feel you're growing, with Ethan, with school? How would Ethan do if you left?" Maya answered softly but firmly. "Yes, I'm happy. Yes, I'm learning." "And Ethan would be devastated." David nodded. "Then the only question is money. I'll match the offer. We'll keep funding your education. And we'll add health insurance for your mother and your brother." Maya's eyes filled with tears, a smile breaking through. "You don't have to." "I do," David interrupted. "You saved my marriage. You gave me back my son. What's that worth?" Her voice broke as she whispered, "I'm staying." Later that evening, Ethan squealed with joy when he heard the news. "Auntie Maya's staying." "Then I'll try running," he said, hopping on one foot before throwing himself into her arms. Over the following weeks, David noticed something small but powerful. Ethan began to sleep more peacefully without jolting awake in the night. In the mornings he counted out loud as he balanced. 27, 30, 31, 45. His little voice carried across the yard, strong and steady. Maya's hands were always there to steady him, but David found his own place too, not interfering but standing behind them both, a silent wall against the wind. One late afternoon, as golden light poured through the trees, Ethan dropped his crutches suddenly and took 3 steps. Then 4. Then 5. Not quick, not smooth, but his own. "Dad," he gasped. "I walked again." David's voice cracked. "You did, champ. You really did." And in that moment he understood. There would always be challenges, the invisible slaps from beyond their gates. But inside their home, filled with pancakes, progress charts on the fridge, and a code of respect, Ethan had found a safe place to learn how to walk. And David had found a safe place to learn how to stay. The following Monday morning felt different even before the skillet began to sizzle. Maya poured batter onto the pan, humming softly while Ethan bounced in his chair. David tied his son's small blue sneakers, kneeling down so their eyes met. "Nervous, champ?" he asked. Ethan nodded, whispering, "What if I fall on stage?" Maya knelt beside him, her eyes steady and kind. "You've fallen 100 times, Ethan. And you've stood up 100 times. If you fall today you'll stand again. But I think you won't." Ethan drew a deep breath, squeezing his father's hand. "Will you sit in the front row?" "Front row," David promised, pressing his palm against his son's small hand. By the time they reached Ethan's preschool, blue and white balloons swayed above the yard. The early summer breeze tugged at the flags overhead. Inside, children giggled and shuffled nervously behind the curtain. Maya guided Ethan to a quiet corner to stretch. Ankle rolls, knee bends, deep breaths, just like at home. But when they approached the backstage entrance, a staff member stopped them abruptly. "Parents only backstage," she said firmly, blocking Maya's way. Maya remained polite but steady. "I'm Ethan's therapy aide." The staffer glanced at her lanyard, then shook her head. "Policy. Parents only." Just then 2 white nannies carrying toddlers walked right past, admitted without question. Caroline's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, her voice low but sharp. "She is family and Ethan's therapy aide. She goes wherever he goes." The staffer hesitated, looking at David as if waiting for his confirmation. David didn't raise his voice, but each word carried weight. "Her name is Maya Johnson. She belongs here." At that moment, a senior teacher recognized Ethan and hurried over, apologizing for the misunderstanding. "Please come in." The backstage air warmed instantly. Maya led Ethan to his spot, adjusting his crutches one last time. Then it was his turn. Ethan stepped onto the stage, his little body trembling but determined. He gripped the microphone with both hands. "My name is Ethan Montgomery," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "When I was smaller I was scared to try. But then I met someone who believed in me. Auntie Maya taught me to be strong and brave." The room went silent. Every parent, every teacher, every child held their breath. Ethan glanced toward the front row, where David gave him a thumbs up. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, he dropped his crutches and walked across the stage, wobbly, uneven, but free. Applause erupted, thunderous and overwhelming, Caroline cried openly, her hands pressed against her cheeks. Maya clasped her hands together, eyes wet but shining with pride. I want to dedicate this to 3 people, Ethan said breathlessly into the microphone, grinning from ear to ear. My dad, who became my best friend. My mom, who always cared for me. And Auntie Maya, who believed I could fly. The audience rose to their feet, clapping until the room shook. Ethan turned toward the side of the stage, calling loudly, Auntie Maya, come here. She froze, shaking her head quickly. But Ethan kept nodding, motioning with his little hand. Finally, shy as a child herself, Maya stepped onto the stage. Ethan threw his arms around her, hugging her tightly in front of the roaring crowd. David stood, took the microphone and drew a deep breath. His voice cracked as he said, Maya isn't just our employee. She's our family. She saved my son, and she saved me too. The words hung in the air like a seal, undeniable and true. After the performance, a line of parents gathered around Maya. Their questions came quickly. What helped him stand longer? How do you keep a child motivated when they're afraid of pain? How do I get my husband to show up like Mr. Montgomery? Maya answered patiently, explaining how to turn therapy into games, how to keep a progress journal, and how to treat every child as whole, not broken. One mother with bright eyes and brown hair said firmly, you should open a therapy center. There are so many children who need this. On the drive home, Ethan clutched a small bouquet in his lap, drifting off to sleep in the back seat. His head rested on Maya's shoulder as the car rolled smoothly under green trees. David glanced in the rearview mirror, then said softly, half to himself, half to his wife, what if we did? A pediatric therapy center. Maya as the clinical director. Maya laughed, shaking her head as though she'd heard a fairy tale. That's a big dream for someone like me. David met her eyes in the mirror, his voice steady. Not someone like you. You. That night, at the kitchen table, they spread out paper and pens like builders laying out the frame of a house. Caroline sketched therapy rooms, sensory play areas, and a backyard with ramps and rails. David listed scholarships for caregivers and subsidies for families who couldn't afford therapy. Maya leaned forward, her voice firm. There has to be anti-bias training for every staff member. No child, no caregiver should ever be made to feel invisible. David wrote the words at the very top of the charter. Anti-bias training. Family-led care. Respect is entry. When Ethan stirred awake and wandered in, he rubbed his eyes, peered at the sketches and asked sleepily, will there be a wall for kids' first steps? There will, Maya whispered, touching his forehead. And your picture goes right in the center. That night, as the pens scratched across paper and cocoa cooled in forgotten mugs, a dream began to take shape. No longer just an idea at the edge of possibility, but a plan spreading across the kitchen table. Lesson 1. Muscles remember what love repeats. Maya scribbled the words into her notebook late at night, underlining them twice with her left hand while flipping through her physical therapy textbook with her right. She had started evening classes at the community college, determined to earn her certification. Most nights, she returned close to midnight, her backpack sliding to the floor beside the washing machine. Her younger brother Caleb, now a sophomore, often sat across from her at the kitchen table, quizzing her with paper cutouts of bones and joints. You got this, sis, he said, tapping her arm in encouragement. Their mother, still working night shifts at the hospital, texted regularly, proud of you both. Meanwhile, in the Montgomery home, mornings had been permanently rearranged. David's no-meeting mornings were non-negotiable now. Instead of rushing into conference calls, he spent time reading books on pediatric therapy and trauma-informed care. Sometimes he simply breathed with Ethan, kneeling beside him as the boy trembled through longer-standing exercises. Caroline found her own place in the new rhythm too. She started a support group for parents in the community, teaching them how to keep progress journals and celebrate one joy a day, so numbers didn't consume their children's lives. Ethan's log began to fill with milestones that tilted steadily upward. 1 minute 20 seconds of standing, 3 steps up, 5 steps in a row. But big dreams always meet resistance. When they presented their plan for Beacon of Hope Pediatric Therapy, the name Ethan proudly chose because, as he explained, Hope is like light, Dad. The zoning board raised its doubts. David laid out parking schedules, ramps, and noise reduction measures. Still, an older neighbor raised his brow and said, traffic from these kinds of families could be a problem. The phrase "these kinds" hung in the air like smoke. Maya clenched her chair, her jaw tight. Caroline straightened her back, calm but unyielding. Families with children who need therapy are these kinds of families, she said. That includes us. Traffic can be engineered. Respect cannot be negotiated. The room stirred uneasily. The chairperson tapped the gavel, pushing the discussion back to numbers. David presented traffic models, promising staggered appointments to ease congestion. In the end, they received provisional approval, conditional, pending adjustments. The challenges didn't stop there. When a contractor came to survey the site, he spoke only to David, flipping through blueprints, calling it your center. He acted as if Maya wasn't even in the room. David stopped mid-sentence. He pointed directly to Maya. She's the clinical director. Run every plan by her first. The contractor faltered, then finally turned toward Maya. She scanned the blueprints carefully, noting details no one else had caught. The slope of the emergency stair ramp, the grip rating of the flooring. Her expertise was undeniable, her place in the project clear. Days stretched on with the smell of fresh paint, drills buzzing, and sunlight streaming into newly opened rooms. Maya insisted on a quiet corner with beanbags and soft lamps. A "How I Feel Today" card box for children who needed words for emotions as much as they needed balance for steps. She wrote a charter for the lobby. Mandatory anti-bias training, family-led care, and transparent progress logs. No one gets erased in the room, she said firmly. David added another clause, the Lena and Caleb Scholarship Fund, a program to help caregivers with experience but no formal credentials return to school. The old house code had grown into the clinic's code. Every staff member, from the receptionist to the technicians, would complete bias training. Their first exercise: recall a time you made someone feel excluded. Now write a rule for yourself. Ask, "How can I help?" instead of, "Who are you?" Through all the construction and paperwork, mornings in the Montgomery backyard never stopped. Ethan still counted out loud as he practiced. 27, 30, 45. His voice steady, his progress undeniable. David realized those mornings were the hidden power supply feeding everything. The house, the project, the dream. One late evening, the three of them sat cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by cartons of signage. Ethan looked up at his father, eyes wide with excitement. "Will there be a ribbon to cut?" "A big one," David said with a grin. "And you'll hold the scissors with me." 2 years rolled forward like a reel on fast forward. Maya held her diploma in hand, the city license hung proudly in the new lobby, and the freshly painted sign read, Beacon of Hope Pediatric Therapy. On opening day, Ethan wore a crisp white shirt, hair neatly combed, scissors in hand with his father. Maya stood in the center, Caleb and their mother beaming in the front row. Caroline pressed her palms together, her face shining with pride. David counted down, 3, 2, 1. The blades cut through the red ribbon. Applause filled the small street. For a fleeting second, Maya remembered the first night she scrubbed juice off the Montgomery floor, when a small boy with crutches had held a rag beside her and said, "We're a team." Now the doors opened wide and sunlight spilled into the brand-new waiting room. Along one wall hung dozens of photographs of children's first steps. At the very center, framed in the brightest light, was Ethan's picture. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Belief plus effort equals progress." By the third week after Beacon of Hope opened its doors, the waiting room was already alive with children and parents. One of the first patients was a 5-year-old girl named Amara, her hair neatly braided into 2 plaits. She stood on the practice mat with nervous eyes fixed on a golden star sticker placed high on the wall. "Eyes on the star," Maya coached gently. "Breathe slow, nice and easy." Amara let go of the railing. For a few seconds she wobbled, arms flailing. Then she steadied herself. 20 seconds. 30. Her mother gasped and burst into tears. "I did it!" Amara shouted, her voice tangled with sobs. From the corner of the room, Ethan, now 6 years old, held up a handmade sign that read, "You can do it." He clapped wildly, then rushed forward to give Amara a high five. Word about the center spread quickly. Parents whispered about how different this place felt. Therapists here didn't just ask for insurance cards. They asked first, "How can we help?" The clinic's code, anti-bias training, family-led care, transparent records, was posted like a pledge on the lobby wall. Therapists learned to listen longer, speak slower, and record progress in ways families could understand. Caroline organized a parent circle where victories weren't measured by numbers but by moments. A new smile, a first step, a laugh after a long silence. One afternoon the center's phone rang. David picked up. "Montgomery speaking." "David, it's Eric," came the voice of his old rival. Eric Sanchez no longer sounded sharp or smug. His voice was soft, stripped of ego. "I owe you an apology. My grandson's been coming to your center for 3 months. He's happier than I've seen in years. Your team, they see him as a whole person." There was a pause. Then Eric added, "You were right about Maya. I was wrong." David stared at the wall of photos, his eyes settling on Ethan's smiling face. He remembered Eric's old words, "Everybody's for sale," like an ink stain he couldn't wash away. Now those same lips admitted defeat. "Thank you for saying that," David replied quietly. Eric cleared his throat. "If you'll allow it, my foundation would like to fund scholarships for caregivers in training. No conditions. Just support." David smiled, not triumphant, just warm. "We'll make it count." The news spread like wildfire. The Maya and Caleb Scholarship suddenly had a second branch of funding, creating opportunities for more caregivers with real experience but no diploma runway. On the first award day, Maya stood before a small group of 12 men and women, people with calloused hands, tired eyes, and bright hope. "You are not just help," she told them, her voice steady. "You are professionals. You have the heart and the skill. Now you'll have the paperwork to match." She clapped first, and the room erupted in applause. Beyond the center, other changes rippled outward. At a nearby preschool, the principal held up a new policy drafted with Caroline and Maya's input. No more parents-only backstage. Caregivers were included. Annual bias training was mandatory for staff. Respectful titles were enforced. No one would ever be dismissed as the maid again. Back in their own neighborhood, the HOA announced its first round of bias training for security officers. The new script began not with, "I need the homeowner," but with, "How can I help?" David witnessed the change firsthand one afternoon. The same guard who had once stopped Maya pulled over his car, tipped his cap politely and said, "Miss Johnson, good afternoon. Anything you need?" Maya smiled back, her shoulders no longer stiff with silent tension. Meanwhile, inside the Montgomery home, Pancake Mondays never lost their magic. Ethan now dashed short distances across the yard without crutches, laughing as he counted his steps. 5 in a row. With my eyes closed. "Eyes open, soldier," Maya teased, making him laugh harder. Evenings were different now too. David closed his laptop earlier, spending more time listening to Ethan's stories from school. Caroline, who had once carried everything alone, found herself sharing the load, not out of exhaustion but out of trust. One afternoon, Amara returned to the center with a badge pinned proudly to her chest. It read, "I took my first steps at Beacon." Her mother hugged Maya tightly. "Thank you for seeing my daughter," she whispered. Maya pointed toward Amara and Ethan, who were now chasing each other clumsily but joyfully across the mat. "They see themselves," she said softly. "We just clear the path." The autumn wind rustled the trees outside, sunlight scattering across the first steps wall where Ethan's photo still glowed at the center. That evening, David parked in front of his home and stood in the yard where Ethan had once balanced, trembling for 30 seconds, where he'd shouted, "Dad, I walked." Now, those moments were seeds that had grown into something far larger than their family. As Ethan came running, panting and excited, he called out, "Dad, Auntie Maya says tomorrow I should try the small hill. Will you watch?" David crouched to his son's level, smiling. "Front row, champ. Always." His phone buzzed just then. A message from Eric. A photo of his grandson standing for 20 seconds unaided, a therapist steadying him from the side. Underneath, the caption read, "Thank you, team." David typed back, attaching a close-up of Ethan's picture on the first steps wall. "Started here." The reply came back instantly, a crying face with a smile. David slipped the phone into his pocket, his heart light. The story that began with orange juice on a floor had now moved beyond their house, beyond their neighborhood, into therapy rooms and family gardens across the city. And at the center of it all was still the same truth. A boy with purple crutches and the woman who once bent down beside him and said, "We're a team." Monday mornings had become predictable. Pancakes on the skillet, Ethan counting down to his backyard routine, and Maya with her clipboard in hand. But one particular morning things turned unexpectedly tense. David's phone buzzed nonstop. A post on the neighborhood app was spreading fast. "Beacon of Hope is using kids for marketing. I saw the maid hugging children just to hang their photos on a wall. Who's supervising her credentials?" Attached was a blurry photo of the First Steps wall. Comments piled up. "People like that shouldn't run a clinic. This is unsafe." David's jaw tightened. He handed the phone to Maya. She read calmly and said, "We don't feed fires. We open the kitchen." She drafted a notice right away. "Open house today. Full protocols, logs, and charter on display. Anyone may observe our work and ask questions." David added his own line before sending it out. "Our doors are glass for a reason." At 11 a.m., unannounced county health inspectors arrived, clearly tipped off anonymously. Maya greeted them with a steady smile. "Welcome. You can see everything." She walked them through the reception area, therapy rooms, the quiet corner she'd designed for overwhelmed children. She opened transparency journals, pointed out safety checklists, fall logs, and signed consent forms. The senior inspector paused in front of the clinic's code framed on the lobby wall: anti-bias training, family-led care, transparency logs. Respect is entry. In one therapy room, 5-year-old Noah, who had cerebral palsy, suddenly stiffened mid-exercise. Therapist Maya Patel reacted quickly, bracing his hips and guiding his legs into the correct position. His mother panicked, but Maya Johnson lowered herself beside the boy, whispering, "He's safe. We ride the wave together." The spasm passed and Noah leaned into her chest, smiling. The inspector didn't speak for a long moment. No form or checklist could capture what he'd just seen. But not everyone was convinced. In the lobby, a gray-suited man waited. "Community college training? That's all she has? Is that enough to run a clinic?" He sneered, eyes cold as they flicked toward Maya. Without flinching, she set her degree, license, and city operating certificate on the desk. "It's enough to do the work right. And I do the work right." The door opened again. Eric Sanchez stepped in with his grandson, his voice carrying across the room. "My grandson has made more progress here in 3 months than in 2 years elsewhere. If credentials equal results, she's overqualified." The room fell silent. The sneer faded. By 3 p.m. the open house began. Parents toured every room, touched the mats, checked the schedules designed to avoid traffic, and flipped through progress journals. Caroline presented the Parent Circle program. Caleb showed siblings how to stretch in the family corner. When the inspectors left, they shook Maya's hand. "Clean logs, strong protocols, appropriate supervision. You run a tight ship. Only one fix: the medicine shelf is too high. Lower it by Friday." Maya wrote it down instantly. Later that evening, David's phone rang. A woman from a prestigious foundation spoke in a smooth, rehearsed tone. "We're ready to cut a 7-figure check, but on one condition. Miss Johnson must remain the public face for PR. Clinical decisions will be handled by a white MD we appoint. Optics matter." The word optics landed like a stone in David's chest. Through the glass walls, he could see Maya crouched beside Amara, counting steps with the little girl. He answered firmly, "Thank you, but we'll pass. We don't sell our mission or the person who built it." The call ended with a click. When Maya heard what had been offered, she simply gave a small smile. "We stay small and right before we grow big and right." Minutes later, Eric texted David. His foundation would cover half the amount, without conditions. "Let the outcomes keep speaking," he wrote. That same evening, the neighborhood app lit up again, but this time with a different tune. Parents flooded the post with photos and clips. "My son took 4 steps today. My daughter stood for 30 seconds without help. They asked how they could help before asking about my insurance." By nightfall, the smear post had been quietly deleted. Meanwhile, Sophie, Caroline's old friend, sent a private message. I need to apologize in person. Caroline stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, we'll talk, with Maya in the room. Before closing time, Ethan threw his arms around Maya. Auntie Maya, did we win? She pressed her forehead to his and smiled. We walked, champ. That's how we win. One step that holds. Behind them, David thought back to the very first night, the orange juice stain, the little boy with purple crutches clutching a rag, and the words that had started it all. We're a team. The storm had passed, and the team was still standing. The meeting was set in the small conference room at Beacon. Sophie Allen arrived early, her coat folded neatly over her arm, eyes darting between the table and the first steps wall. She looked nervous, her face tight with hesitation. Maya sat across from her, calm but guarded. Caroline took the middle seat, her presence steady, while David leaned against the back wall with his arms crossed. Sophie began, her voice uneven. I said things that were ugly. Coded. Hurtful. I thought I was protecting my friend, but I was really protecting my own picture of how things should look. I hurt you, Maya. I'm sorry. Maya didn't rush to make her feel better. She nodded slowly. Thank you for naming it. She paused, then added firmly, but apology isn't enough. In this clinic and in our home, respect isn't optional. If you want to be around Ethan, you stand on that line with us. Sophie inhaled deeply. I will. Caroline slid a sheet of paper across the table, the clinic's code of conduct, condensed to one page. Start here. Sophie glanced at it, giving a weak smile. Homework. Understood. As she left, Sophie paused in front of Ethan's photo at the center of the first steps wall. He looks so happy, she whispered. Maya's reply was soft but steady. He is. The following week, Beacon received the Community Partnership Award from the county's preschool system. The ceremony was held right in the clinic's small hall, decorated with balloons and children's drawings. The preschool principal who had once enforced the parents-only backstage rule stepped up to the microphone. We rewrote our policies because of what we learned here, she said. Today we honor not just services but a philosophy, seeing the whole child and the whole family. Maya walked to the stage, hands trembling slightly as she accepted the plaque. She glanced at the front row, her mother no longer working exhausting night shifts, Caleb in a crisp blue shirt, Caroline and David side by side, and Ethan with neatly combed hair, holding up 2 fingers in AV for victory. I grew up watching my little brother get left behind, Maya began, her voice catching. Here we don't let anyone get left behind. We put ramps where stairs used to be, both in buildings and in hearts. The room went quiet, then erupted into applause. David felt something swell inside his chest. Not loud, not showy, but solid and unshakable. That evening, after the cleanup, Ethan tugged his father outside to the porch. Yellow light spilled over the wooden steps where he had once practiced his first curb exercises. Dad, he asked, his voice curious, do all families have an Auntie Maya? David pulled him close, remembering the first night he had walked in early. Not all families, champ. But every family can be an Auntie Maya for someone. It means believing in people before they believe in themselves. Ethan thought hard, then nodded. Then we should be that for somebody else. David smiled. We already started. He pointed across the street to the glowing clinic. See that light? That's us leaving the porch light on for others. In the weeks that followed, Beacon launched a small tradition called First Steps Day. Once a month, children who reached a new milestone rang a brass bell hung in the lobby. Each child received a badge. I took my first steps at Beacon. Amara rang the bell first that month, her face shining with pride. Ethan handed out the badges with mock seriousness, declaring, "Warriors ring bells." The sound echoed across the hall like sparks of light. One rainy morning, David and Maya were invited to speak at City Children's Hospital about family-led care. In a bright seminar room, a young doctor asked, "How do you keep from burning out?" Maya answered simply, "We stay human. We build quiet corners in the schedule the same way we built them in the building. And we ring bells for small wins." The room chuckled softly, not at a joke but at the wisdom wrapped in gentleness. Back at Beacon, a young couple waited nervously in the lobby. The mother clutched a thick medical file, eyes red from crying. "We were told he'll never walk," she said. Maya crouched to the boy's level, leaving the file untouched. "What's your name? What do you like to play?" she asked. Behind her, David remembered the very first night, the moment Maya never asked "Who are you?" but instead asked "How can I help?" He realized everything had begun with the right gaze. That night, when the house was finally quiet, David opened a small wooden box in his desk. Inside lay a crayon drawing Ethan had once made, a stick figure with purple crutches standing beside another figure holding a rag. Beneath, in uneven letters, were the words, "We're a team." David rested his hand on the paper, thinking of all the steps they had already climbed, and all the ones still ahead. Late summer brought with it the first annual Little Lights Festival at Beacon. The garden behind the center was transformed with strings of fairy lights draped across the maple trees. Wooden tables were lined with cocoa, cupcakes, and small cakes baked by families. In one corner, a mobile version of the first steps wall stood tall, inviting parents to take pictures beside the framed milestones. Children ran across the grass wearing handmade paper crowns decorated with their goals. 45 seconds standing, 3 steps up the ramp, first lap around the yard. Their laughter carried through the night air. David moved through the crowd, shaking hands, hugging parents, and sharing smiles. But his eyes always searched for Maya. She was by the brass bell, tying a ribbon to its handle, making sure it gleamed under the lights. Caroline led the parent group in a game called One Win This Week, encouraging each parent to share a small but meaningful victory. Caleb handled the music, playing cheerful songs that kept the children dancing. When the chatter softened, David called Maya into the circle. Clearing his throat, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with weight. "There's a question I've carried for a long time, and tonight I think I owe it to ask out loud." The crowd hushed. David turned directly to Maya, no pretense, no shield. "Do you regret staying with us? Back then you had other offers, more money, benefits, a car. Do you regret choosing us?" The garden went still, so quiet that the leaves brushing against each other sounded loud. Maya looked around her. She saw her mother laughing with a boy who had just balanced for 20 seconds. She saw Caleb flashing her a thumbs up across the lawn. She saw Ethan racing with his arms stretched wide, his face bright as the lights above him. Finally, she turned back to David and spoke clearly. "No. I would have missed watching this boy grow into who he is. I would have missed seeing a family find each other again. And I would have missed my own purpose." She tilted her head slightly, her smile warm. "Sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they carry a towel and a clipboard." The crowd erupted into laughter, then applause that rolled across the garden like a wave. Eric Sanchez, standing near the edge of the circle, stepped forward and raised the microphone. His voice carried a surprising humility. "I once said everybody's for sale. I was wrong. What's priceless is the right person in the right place doing the right work. Thank you for not selling." He raised his glass and cheers followed. Parents clinked mugs of cocoa, children jumped and clapped. The bell gleamed, waiting for its turn. As evening deepened, the children lined up to strike it. Amara rang first, hitting it 3 times with her tiny hand. "I did it," she shouted, swallowing the stars with her smile. Noah tapped it softly with 2 fingers, his eyes locked on his mother's tears. Ethan went last. He raised his hand high, hesitated for a moment as though savoring it, then struck one clean note. "This one's for Auntie Maya," he whispered just loud enough for the microphone to catch. Maya's eyes glistened. "For your tomorrow," she replied, her voice trembling. The festival wound down slowly, families gathering into small clusters, their children chasing each other across the lawn under the glow of the string lights. David drifted to the edge of the garden, his eyes drawn toward his own house down the street. He could still picture that first night, the spilled orange juice on the floor, the boy with purple crutches clutching a rag, and the maid he had nearly overlooked. Ethan bounded up the porch steps and sat beside him, cheeks flushed from running. "Dad, remember the first night you came home early and saw me cleaning with Auntie Maya?" "Every detail," David answered softly. "What were you thinking then?" Ethan asked curiously. David smiled faintly. that you were the bravest kid I'd ever seen, that I'd already missed too much, and that I didn't want to miss another minute. Ethan leaned against him quietly, then murmured, "I'm glad you stayed." David squeezed his son's shoulder. "Me too." Soon Caroline and Maya joined them, carrying cups of cocoa. The four of them stood in the garden, the fairy lights swaying above. Ethan broke the silence with his newest ritual. 3 things we're grateful for. Caroline went first. Mornings with no meetings. David added, a house code that became a clinic code. Maya smiled softly. Kids who ring bells. Ethan grinned. A family that shows up. Do we do this every day? He asked eagerly. Every day, David promised. Even when we're tired. Especially when we're tired. Maya looked at Caroline, who nodded. We'll put it on the fridge next to the progress chart. The garden glowed warmly as porch lights blinked on across the neighborhood, small promises that light would always be left on for those who came home late. David glanced at the first steps wall through the clinic window. 30 seconds had become 45. 8 steps had become running. And a woman once asked, "Who are you?" was now signing charts as clinical director, guiding a whole town to stand taller. Before heading inside, Ethan tugged on Maya's hand. Auntie Maya, are angels real? She bent down, touching her forehead to his. They're real when we do the work for them. Ethan nodded, eyes wide with understanding. David looked at them both and thought, we're a team. Tomorrow they would count again, not just steps but the moments that made life whole. The next Monday began like any other, with the familiar sizzle of pancake batter on the skillet and Ethan bouncing in his chair waiting for breakfast. But David's phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter. A new storm was brewing. On the neighborhood app, a heated post was climbing to the top. Beacon of Hope is just a PR stunt. That maid is hugging kids to hang their pictures on the wall. Where are her real credentials? This isn't safe. Attached was a blurry photo of the first steps wall. Dozens of comments followed. This feels sketchy. People like that shouldn't be running a clinic. David clenched his jaw. He showed the screen to Maya. She read it quietly, then exhaled. We don't argue online, she said calmly. We invite them in. Within minutes she typed up a message. Open house this afternoon. Full protocols, logs and charter available for anyone to review. Come see how we work. David added one line before posting. Our doors are glass for a reason. At 11 sharp, a team of county health inspectors showed up, clearly tipped off. Maya welcomed them with an even tone. You'll see everything. She walked them through the reception, therapy rooms and quiet corners. She opened transparency journals, showed safety checklists, consent forms and progress logs. The senior inspector paused at the lobby wall, reading aloud, anti-bias training. Family-led care. Transparency logs. Respect is entry. In therapy room 2, little Noah stiffened mid-exercise, his body jerking in spasm. Therapist Maya Patel braced him carefully, signaling positions with quick precision. Maya Johnson knelt, her hands steady on his back. Ride the wave, Noah. You're safe. Slowly the tension released. Noah leaned against her, sweaty but smiling. His mother broke into tears of relief. The inspector said nothing, but his eyes softened. No chart could capture what he had just witnessed. Still, not all doubts vanished. In the lobby, a man in a gray suit sneered. Community college training? That's all she's got? And she runs this. Maya calmly laid her diploma, license, and operating certificate on the desk. It's enough to do the work right. And I do the work right. The door opened again. Eric Sanchez entered with his grandson in tow. His voice was loud enough for all to hear. My grandson has made more progress here in 3 months than he did in 2 years at other clinics. If credentials equal outcomes, she's over-credentialed. The gray-suited man fell silent. At 3 o'clock, parents arrived for the open house. They toured every room, tested the mats, flipped through charts, and even timed the staggered scheduling system. Caroline presented the parent peer group, explaining how families supported one another. Caleb led siblings through stretches in the family play area. The inspectors returned to the lobby, shook Maya's hand and gave their verdict. Logs are clean. Supervision is appropriate. You run a strong program. One adjustment, move the medicine shelf lower. Maya wrote it down immediately. But the challenges weren't finished. Later that evening, David got a call from a high-profile foundation. The woman's voice was smooth, polished. We're prepared to donate 7 figures, but there's a condition. Miss Johnson remains the face of PR and clinical decisions shift to a white physician we appoint. Optics matter. The word optics hit David like a slap. Through the glass, he saw Maya crouched beside Amara, counting steps, her focus entirely on the child. He answered firmly, "Thank you but no. We don't sell out our mission or the person who built it." The line went silent before disconnecting. When David explained the call, Maya simply smiled faintly. "We'll stay small and right before we grow big and right." Not long after, Eric texted David. His foundation would cover half the amount, no strings attached. "Let the results do the talking," he wrote. By nightfall, the neighborhood app told a different story. Parents flooded the old smear thread with their own photos and clips. "My son took his first 4 steps today. My daughter stood for 30 seconds straight. They asked how they could help before asking about my insurance." The original post vanished quietly, deleted by its anonymous author. That same night, Sophie messaged Caroline, "I need to apologize face to face." Caroline typed back after a long pause, "We'll talk," with Maya in the room. At closing time, Ethan leapt into Maya's arms, eyes sparkling. "Auntie Maya, did we win?" She pressed her forehead to his. "We don't win by fighting, champ. We win by walking. One step that holds." Behind them, David stood in the lobby looking at the first steps wall. He remembered the boy with purple crutches and a rag, and the maid he had nearly overlooked. Now he saw a family, a clinic, a movement. And above it all, one truth that carried them forward: we're a team. The following afternoon, Sophie showed up at Beacon. She wore a simple sweater and carried no entourage, no polished air of superiority. Her steps were hesitant, her eyes fixed on the first steps wall as though she needed its courage before turning toward Maya and Caroline. They sat together in a small meeting room. Caroline kept her voice calm but firm. "You asked to apologize. We're listening." Sophie swallowed hard. "I was wrong. I said things I can't take back. I tried to dress it up as concern, but really it was prejudice. I dismissed you, Maya, without even realizing how deep my bias ran. I thought I was protecting Caroline. Instead, I was tearing her world apart. I'm sorry." Maya held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Thank you for naming it. But understand, this clinic isn't a place where apologies live on their own. Respect here is policy. If you want to be around Ethan, if you want to be near this family, you follow the same rules we all live by." She slid a 1-page sheet across the table. The condensed Beacon Code: anti-bias training, transparent communication, family-led care. Sophie read the lines silently, then gave a weak, almost grateful smile. "I'll start here." As she left, Sophie lingered at the wall. She touched Ethan's photo softly, whispering to no one in particular, "He looks so free." Maya's reply, firm but kind, followed her out. "Because he is." Days later, Beacon was buzzing with celebration. The clinic had just been awarded the Community Partnership recognition from the county. Instead of a hotel ballroom, the ceremony was held in Beacon's modest hall, decorated with drawings and hand-painted stars by the children. Parents filled the seats, their children clapping along to Caleb's playful music. The preschool principal who once enforced the harsh parents-only backstage rule now stood at the microphone. "This clinic helped us rewrite our own policies," she admitted. "We now honor caregivers, not just biological parents. We require annual bias training for all staff. And we measure progress by joy as much as by numbers. This award belongs here because here is where change started." Applause filled the room as Maya stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the plaque, but her voice was clear. "I grew up watching my brother left behind because people couldn't see past their labels. This clinic was built to make sure no child, no caregiver, is ever left behind again. We put ramps where stairs used to be, both in buildings and in hearts." The audience rose to their feet. David felt the moment etch itself permanently into his memory. Maya, strong and steady, holding an award that she had earned not by paper credentials alone, but by her heart, her grit, and her refusal to bend. That evening after cleanup, Ethan tugged David out to the porch. He pointed to the very spot where he had once practiced balancing on the curb. "Dad," he asked seriously, "do you think every family gets an Auntie Maya?" David crouched beside him, his answer thoughtful. No, champ. Not every family does. But every family can be one for somebody else. It means showing up when nobody asks you to. It means believing in people before they believe in themselves. Ethan nodded slowly as if he understood more than his age allowed. Then we should be that. For someone else. David ruffled his hair. We already are. He pointed to the glowing clinic across the street. See that? That's our porch light, left on for the next person who needs it. In the weeks that followed, Beacon launched a new tradition called First Steps Day. Once a month, any child who hit a milestone rang a shiny brass bell in the lobby. They received a badge with bold letters, "I took my first steps at Beacon." Amara rang it first, grinning wide as she shouted, "I did it." Noah rang next, soft and shy, his mother crying behind him. Ethan rang last, standing a little taller, his crutches leaning against the wall. "This one's for Auntie Maya," he declared proudly. The sound echoed across the lobby like a promise. That same week, Maya and David were invited to present at City Children's Hospital. In a bright seminar room, doctors and nurses leaned forward as David outlined their model. A young physician asked, "How do you prevent burnout?" Maya answered simply, "We don't forget we're human. We make quiet corners in our days and in our building. We ring bells for little wins. That's how you keep going." Laughter rippled gently across the room, not mocking but warm, recognizing truth dressed in simplicity. Back home, new families arrived every week, nervous and uncertain, carrying thick folders of medical papers. Maya always knelt to the child's eye level first. "What's your name? What do you like to play?" Paperwork came later. David often stood in the background, remembering the night everything had begun. The spilled juice, the purple crutches, and the rag held by a little boy. He thought of the question he had once asked silently, "Who are you?" Now, every time he saw Maya meet a child's eyes, he knew the better question had always been, "How can I help?" That night, in the quiet of his study, David opened a wooden box. Inside lay Ethan's old crayon drawing, a stick figure with purple crutches beside another figure holding a rag. Beneath, scrawled in uneven letters, were the words, "We're a team." He ran his fingers over the faded wax lines, smiling softly. That simple truth had grown into something none of them could have imagined. Autumn settled over the neighborhood, crisp leaves swirling across the sidewalks. At Beacon, the therapy mats were rolled out as usual, but the clinic buzzed with a different kind of energy, preparation for the citywide Families in Motion conference. Beacon had been invited not just to attend, but to lead a keynote session. Maya felt both honored and nervous. She had spoken to parents before, but this was different. Doctors, policymakers, and directors from across the state would be in the audience. David reassured her every evening. "You don't have to impress them. Just tell the truth. That's what you've been doing all along." Caroline organized the logistics: childcare for families attending, schedules for volunteers, food and seating for guests. Caleb pitched in with his tech skills, setting up slides and testing microphones. Ethan, of course, insisted on making his own contribution. He drew a giant poster with the words "Hope is a light" in uneven but bold letters, surrounded by yellow stars. On the morning of the conference, the hall was filled to the brim. Maya stood on stage, clutching her notes. She looked out at the sea of faces, many wearing skeptical expressions, waiting to see what this community clinic could offer. She took a deep breath and began. "I am not a doctor in the traditional sense," she said plainly. "But I am a caregiver who refused to be erased. I built this clinic to make sure children and families would never be invisible again. We believe progress is not just measured in steps, but in dignity, in belonging, and in joy." She told the story of Amara balancing for the first time, of Noah riding through his spasm with help, of Ethan counting each second like a victory. She explained the Beacon Code: anti-bias training, family-led care, transparent records. By the time she finished, the room had shifted. The skepticism had melted into silence, followed by applause that grew louder until it filled the hall. Afterward, several doctors approached her. One said, "You reminded us why we started this work." Another added, "Your model is what hospitals need, not just clinics." David felt a rush of pride. watching her surrounded by people who finally recognized her worth. He thought of the night she had scrubbed juice from his floor, dismissed as the maid, and compared it to this moment, Maya Johnson standing tall, a leader by every measure. Meanwhile, back at Beacon, the community was embracing the clinic as its own. Parents volunteered to repaint the garden fence, neighbors donated toys and books for the children's corner, and a local bakery promised free cupcakes for First Steps Day each month. What once had been viewed with suspicion was now celebrated as a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Yet not everyone accepted the change. One evening, as David was leaving the clinic, he overheard two men muttering outside. "Place like this doesn't belong here. Brings too much traffic. Changes the feel of the neighborhood." David paused but didn't argue. He knew time would answer louder than words. Inside, Maya was cleaning up after a long day when Ethan ran to her, holding a small notebook. "Auntie Maya, I wrote my own clinic code," he announced proudly. She opened it and read his list written in crooked letters. 1. Be kind first. 2. Ask how to help. 3. Cheer for small wins. 4. Don't let anyone feel small. Maya's throat tightened. She hugged him close, whispering, "That's the best code I've ever read." That weekend, Beacon hosted its second First Steps Day. Families crowded the lobby, children clutching badges in their fists. Amara walked 10 full steps and rang the bell twice. Noah climbed a single stair and grinned like he'd conquered a mountain. And Ethan, now stronger, steadier, ran across the mat without his crutches, arms wide. The crowd gasped, then cheered so loudly it rattled the windows. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she clapped. Caroline's hands shook as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed with pride. David wiped his eyes openly, no longer ashamed of showing emotion. Ethan ran straight into Maya's arms. "See, Auntie Maya? Hope really is light." "Yes, champ," she whispered. "And you just lit up the whole room." Later that night, after the celebration wound down, David sat on the porch, staring at the clinic glowing softly across the street. Caroline joined him, holding 2 mugs of tea. She leaned against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what life would be if you hadn't come home early that night?" David shook his head slowly. "I don't let myself. That one night changed everything. The juice spilled, the rag, the crutches. It was the beginning of a new family." From the doorway, Maya's voice carried gently. "Sometimes the smallest step opens the biggest door." David turned toward her, smiling. "And sometimes the person who wipes the floor ends up building the house." The three of them sat together, watching the porch light flicker on as if it knew its job, to guide the way home for whoever needed it. Winter arrived, laying a soft blanket of snow across the neighborhood. Beacon's garden sat quiet under white frost, but inside the clinic, the air was warm with laughter, therapy sessions, and the sound of the brass bell ringing for small victories. The city had taken notice. A journalist from the local paper visited one afternoon, shadowing Maya as she worked. He watched her kneel beside a boy learning to shift his weight from one leg to the other, her encouragement patient and calm. Later he asked, "What makes your clinic different?" Maya smiled simply. "We don't just treat bodies, we restore dignity. Every child deserves to be seen as more than a diagnosis. Every caregiver deserves to be respected as more than a title. That's what we stand for." The article, titled "Hope Rings at Beacon," spread quickly. Parents who had hesitated began calling in. Donations increased. Families from outside the neighborhood drove in, eager to be part of something genuine. But success came with pressure. One evening, a well-dressed representative from a healthcare corporation showed up unannounced. Sitting across from David in the office, she slid a folder across the table. "We're prepared to buy the clinic outright. You'll stay on as advisors and Miss Johnson can have a PR role. But the system needs uniformity. No more open journals, no more caregiver codes. Optics matter." David pushed the folder back. "We're not for sale." Maya's voice was steady. "This place was built on trust. You can't sell that." The woman frowned, packed her papers and left with clipped steps. Later that night, David confessed to Maya, "They'll keep coming. The bigger we grow, the more people will want to own us." Maya shook her head firmly. "Let them want. We'll keep walking." Meanwhile, Ethan was blossoming in ways no one had imagined. His strength had grown so much that he now ran short laps without crutches. At school, he volunteered to read aloud in front of his class. His teacher called David one afternoon and said, "I've never seen such confidence in him. He's not just standing taller, he's shining." That weekend, the Montgomerys and Maya attended the school's winter showcase. Ethan stood nervously on stage at first, but when he spotted Maya and his parents in the front row, his courage rose. He recited his lines without faltering, then raised his arms in triumph as the crowd applauded. After the show, he rushed into Maya's arms. "Did I do good?" "You did more than good," she whispered. "You showed them light." The winter also brought challenges. Snowstorms made transportation difficult for some families, and Beacon struggled to keep appointments running. Maya suggested a new program, Home Steps. Therapists would visit children at home, bringing mats and tools for families who couldn't reach the clinic. Caleb offered to drive while volunteers signed up eagerly. The program was a success. Parents posted photos of therapists kneeling on living room rugs, children balancing by couches, families ringing handbells in their kitchens to celebrate victories. The sense of community grew stronger than ever. One snowy evening, as Maya packed up after a long day, she found Ethan sitting quietly in the lobby, doodling in his notebook. He looked up and said, "Auntie Maya, do you think I could help kids one day too?" She sat beside him, her eyes warm. "You already do, champ. Every time you ring that bell, every time you smile, every time you tell another kid they can, you're helping. One day you'll help in even bigger ways." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his doodle. She peeked at the page. It was a sketch of the clinic with stick figures holding hands beneath it, the brass bell shining overhead. At the bottom he had written in uneven letters, "Beacon is for everyone." That night, when David saw the drawing, he felt tears prick his eyes. "Out of the mouths of children comes the truth," he whispered to Caroline. The snow outside glowed in the streetlights, the clinic shining warmly in contrast. David thought of that first winter when he'd nearly missed everything. Now, every storm felt bearable, every challenge surmountable, because they had built not just a clinic, but a movement. As he stood at the window, Maya joined him quietly. "Funny how it started with spilled juice," she said. David chuckled softly. "And now it's a flood of hope." They stood together, looking out at the snow-dusted clinic, both knowing the journey wasn't finished. But for now, the bell, the laughter, and the steady light of Beacon carried them forward. Spring arrived, melting the snow into streams that ran along the curbs, and Beacon's garden bloomed back to life. Parents planted tulips and sunflowers with their children, turning the once quiet patch of earth into a bright field of color. Every week, more families came through the doors, and the brass bell rang often enough to feel like part of the clinic's heartbeat. But with growth came fresh challenges. The waiting list grew longer, and families drove hours to reach the center. Some complained about the drive. Others asked if Beacon would ever expand. David worried about how to keep up without losing what made the clinic special. "Scaling can't mean stripping away soul," he muttered one night while reviewing schedules. Maya agreed. "We'll expand only if we can keep the code intact. If growth threatens the promise, it's not real progress." Caroline suggested a solution: partner with other small community centers, sharing Beacon's charter and training model so families everywhere could benefit. Caleb designed a simple website where caregivers could download free guides. How to build a quiet corner, how to track wins, how to talk to families without bias. The downloads spread quickly, reaching homes and schools far beyond their own city. Then came the surprise: an invitation to present Beacon's model at the state capitol. A committee wanted to hear how small clinics could fill gaps hospitals often left. Maya hesitated, but David pushed gently. "You've carried this from the floor of our home to this building. Now take it to the state. They need to hear you." On the morning of the hearing, Maya wore a plain navy dress and carried Ethan's old drawing in her bag, the one with stick figures under the shining bell. She sat at the long table, nerves tapping in her chest, but when she looked over and saw Ethan waving proudly from the gallery, her fear melted. She spoke firmly: "Families deserve places where their children are not reduced to files or diagnoses. At Beacon, we show what's possible when you lead with respect, when you treat caregivers as equals, and when you celebrate every win no matter how small. Our work isn't fancy, but it changes lives. The chamber was quiet, then filled with applause that surprised even Maya. Afterward, a legislator approached her. "Your words reminded us that policy is only good if it reaches real people." "Thank you." News outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Local Clinic Inspires State Leaders." Beacon became not just a center, but a symbol of what community-driven care could achieve. Back home, the clinic hosted its third First Steps Day. Families gathered in the lobby, balloons floating above, and children clutching badges ready to ring the bell. Amara ran the full length of the mat and rang it 3 times, shouting, "I'm faster now." Noah managed to climb 2 steps on his own, grinning ear to ear. Then came Ethan. He stood without his crutches, his face determined. Slowly, steadily he walked across the mat on his own. When he reached the end, he looked at Maya and whispered, "This is for us." Then he rang the bell so hard it echoed down the hall. Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. David clapped until his hands hurt, and Maya pressed both hands over her heart. The entire room erupted in cheers. Later that night, as the family sat together on the porch, Ethan leaned against Maya and asked, "Do you think one day kids won't need a beacon because every place will treat them right?" Maya thought carefully before answering. "That's the dream, champ. That's why we shine a light, so others can see and copy it." David added, "But until then we'll keep our porch light on." The glow from the clinic across the street felt brighter than ever that evening, not just a building but a beacon in truth. Families who once felt invisible now had a place where they belonged, and the ripples were spreading farther than any of them had expected. As the stars blinked overhead, David remembered again the simple crayon drawing tucked away in his desk. "We're a team." He realized the words no longer described just their family. It described a movement. And the movement was only beginning. Summer returned, filling the neighborhood with long days, warm evenings, and the sound of children's laughter drifting through open windows. Beacon had now been open for 3 full years. What had started as a fragile idea had grown into a place families trusted, a place that carried hope like a steady flame. The lobby walls were covered with new photos, dozens of children smiling proudly beside their milestones. The brass bell shined from constant use, its rope worn soft from little hands tugging with joy. And yet, every time it rang, Maya felt the same rush of pride as if it were the first. One evening, the team gathered to celebrate Beacon's anniversary. Parents filled the hall with homemade dishes, kids ran through the garden, and neighbors stopped by to congratulate them. At the center of the room, Caroline raised her glass. This clinic began with small steps and a promise: to see every child, every family. Today that promise is stronger than ever. Applause rose and David followed. When we started, people asked if we were qualified. They doubted, they questioned, they dismissed. But the truth is here, in every photo on that wall, in every note rung by that bell. Maya, you didn't just help my son. You built a future for countless families. The room erupted in cheers. Ethan climbed onto a chair, holding a badge high. "This is for Auntie Maya," he shouted, making everyone laugh and clap louder. Later, as the crowd thinned, David found a quiet moment on the porch with Maya and Caroline. The summer air was thick with crickets, the glow of Beacon spilling across the street. David's voice softened. "I think back to that night, the spilled juice, the rag, the boy with purple crutches. If I hadn't walked in early, if I hadn't seen what I almost missed," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I can't imagine life without this." Maya smiled gently. "Sometimes it takes a mess to make us notice what matters." Caroline placed her hand over Maya's. "You weren't just here for Ethan. You were here for all of us. You gave us more than therapy, you gave us family." Ethan, who had been listening quietly, leaned against Maya. "And you gave me my legs back." Her eyes filled with tears as she hugged him. "No, champ. You gave yourself your legs back. I just reminded you that you could." That night, when the house was quiet, David opened the wooden box in his desk. Inside lay the old crayon drawing, 2 stick figures, one with crutches, one with a rag, beneath the words, "We're a team." The paper was wrinkled, the colors faded, but its truth glowed brighter than ever. He placed it on the mantel, no longer tucked away but displayed where everyone could see. As dawn broke the next morning, Ethan called out from the yard. "Dad. Auntie Maya. Watch me." He stood on the small hill at the edge of the grass. Slowly, steadily, he walked down without help, his arms spread wide, his steps strong and sure. When he reached the bottom, he shouted, "I did it." David and Maya ran to him, clapping and laughing. Caroline joined, her face glowing with pride. The four of them stood together in the morning sun, holding each other tight. Beacon's doors would open again that day, welcoming more families, more children, more stories. But for this moment they simply stood as a team, proof that small beginnings can spark great change and that love, respect, and perseverance can rewrite any future. And as the brass bell rang again in the clinic across the street, its echo carried farther than ever, a sound of hope not just for one boy or one family, but for everyone who dared to believe.